All right. Hey guys, thanks for joining us today. Rich Westermeyer with Benesmart here. For those of you that registered, you probably know we're going to be diving in to talk about pharmacy benefits today and what you can do to protect yourself from what's going on in the market. We're going to give it just a few seconds, let everyone get situated and join the call with us. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest today. On with us, coming from the beautiful state of Montana, we have Trevor Dare. Trevor is a married man. He has a wife and 4 kids. Don't know how he finds any time to work, being that I have 1 kid and I can barely keep up. But somehow he does it, and he does it very well. Trevor's the president and founder of Granite Peak Analytics. And if you're wondering what Granite Peak Analytics does, well, this is what they do. They manage pharmacy spend for over 80,000 lives nationwide. And Trevor's been doing this for 15 years, guys. So he's been in the employee benefits world for a long time. Deep roots in the self-insured space, also especially on the pharmacy side. He was a former director of prescription services at a major third-party administrator. In that role, he led 100 plus PBM transitions to transparent cost plus models, which we'll spend some time talking about today. Trevor also spent some time at the Montana Family Pharmacy Association, and he founded Granite Peaks back in 2019. The mission of Granite Peaks is really to help employers fix the broken pharmacy benefit system. He's known for breaking down silos between pharmacy and medical to improve care and lower total costs. Trevor's also a sought-after speaker, which is where I first got to know him a couple of years ago at an industry event. And he's a licensed benefit consultant who just simplifies the complexities of the PBM market. So happy to be on with you today, Trevor. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Rich, thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Trevor, did I miss anything in the bio? Is there anything else that the people today need to know about you?
No, I mean, obviously I don't sleep much, but other than that,
I would buy. Trevor, tell us a little bit about the name Granite Peaks. Where'd that come from?
Yeah, Granite Peak was it's kind of an interesting story. I'll try and keep it brief. My co-founder, a pharmacist, we were driving back from a meeting. We'd been meeting with all the payers in the state of Montana, helping educate them on pharmacy, not just the employers and patients overpaying, but that impact on independent community pharmacy. And he asked me if I knew the tallest, what the highest point in Montana was. I'm a lifelong Montanan, 4th generation. I like knowing all the nuances of the state. And I didn't know. And he was like, it's Granite Peak. And he's like, do you know where it's at? And for those of you that have been to Montana or know about Montana, Northwest Montana is kind of like glacier, big mountains. And Granite Peak is actually in the Beartooth Mountains in south central Montana, like 40 miles from where I live. And he's like, it's right there. We're driving by it. And it correlated in the sense that I really love and take pride in being a Montanan and knowing these things, but I didn't know it because either I had never looked it up myself or no one had educated me on it. And we found that, that's really how the industry works with pharmacy benefits is most people don't know what they don't know. And so finding different ways to educate through, independent data analytics or just experience is sort of what Granite Peak Analytics was founded on. So it's kind of a unique name, but it's been a fun ride. And the goal is just simply to eliminate prescription overspend. I mean, that's what we do, and we do it in a number of different ways. But that's how the name came about. And yeah, I don't see us changing it anytime soon.
Awesome. Well, I know there's no shortage of mountains in Montana. There's also no shortage of overspend on prescriptions in our country. So thanks for sharing a little bit about your company. And again, thanks for joining us today. Let's go ahead and dive in, Trevor. Today, we're going to be talking about managing pharmacy benefit costs. We have 2 primary topics that we want to cover with you today, guys. And number 1 is going to be the GLP-1 explosion, which we're going to touch on first. Second topic we're going to hit on is the legal minefield. If you've been paying any bit of attention, you can see that PBMs have been making the news quite a bit, but also on the flip side, there's been some employers out there that have been taken to task for how they've managed their pharmacy spend. And that's what we want to focus on today, is to help you guys avoid some of those legal mines out there that could potentially get your company in some hot water. And then finally, what we're going to hit on, we're going to talk about an action plan. So what can smarter employers do to improve their pharmacy benefit spend today without sacrificing essentially any of the drugs that their people need to stay healthy? So let's go ahead and start off on the GLP-1 front. So we've seen obviously an explosion in the GLP-1 market. For those of you that don't know, we're talking things like Ozempic and Wegovy, and we're going to be diving into this a little bit. But so today, or actually last year, let me back up. 2024, I believe the GLP-1 market was about 35 to 40 billion. Does that sound right, Trevor? On the whole?
Yep, and growing quickly.
And growing. And yeah, they're projecting that by 2030, it's going to be a $100 billion market. So right now, it's just absolutely eating into the employer spend on the pharmacy side of things. And we're seeing those numbers climb and climb and climb. This is a drug that right now has about $1,000 monthly cost. So, obviously it can be used for quite a few different things. It can be used for diabetes, but it can also be used for weight loss. And that's become one of the more popular trends that we're seeing in the market. And if you look at our country as a whole, we're not the healthiest country when it comes to BMI. So there's a lot of people that are going to be using this drug for weight loss if they're not already. And at $1,000 monthly pop, you start to add that up. It's no surprise that, you can see a very high monthly spend on your drugs. And we've had dozens of requests for it. Every time I go into an open enrollment meeting, people ask me during the open enrollment meeting, is Ozempic going to be covered? It's a hot topic. So let's start with that, Trevor. We're seeing just dozens of requests across our client base. What's driving the surge right now, and is it sustainable?
Yeah, I think two things are driving the surge, right? You've got social media in Hollywood. So you've got platforms that are really promoting the benefits of these medications where we've never really seen that before. And then you've got results. There's no doubt that these medications work. And so when you have, massive social media bias, and then you have actual results, those two things together have really driven, I think, the big surge that we're seeing. Now, I think it's always important, and I know we're going to go into, to kind of separate what these drugs do and what they're treating, and how we can kind of make sure that if your plan is covering them, let's say for diabetes, that's what they're being used for, and not off-label for weight loss and things like that.
Okay. That kind of leads us into our next question. For a mid-sized business who's trying to do right by their employees, what are the pros and cons of covering GLP-1s today?
Yeah, the reality is every company is covering GLP-1s for diabetes, and they've become kind of frontline treatment. They really do help folks get control of their A1C, and they do a better job than prior therapies. So that doesn't mean they're the only therapy out there. That doesn't mean that there's not other things that could be less costly that still could be more effective. But the patient demand plus the results really leads to a lot of providers prescribing the GLP-1, especially for those folks that have diabetes and have struggled getting it under control. Insulin is a phenomenal way to control, especially type 2 diabetes, but it takes a lot of work. You're checking your sugars, you're injecting the insulin and those types of things. So these things are less injections and better results. So anything that's going to be kind of more efficient is going to work. But the question really is, how does a company afford these? And what we find is, you have to look at this in a couple different ways, right? So like I said, you're already covering GLP-1s for diabetes. Your plan covers, definitely treatment for diabetes. Now you've got an approval for one of the weight loss medications for sleep apnea, first prescription drug treatment for sleep apnea. And most plans cover, sleep apnea. So you're going to see these medications coming through your plan, regardless of whether you're covering for obesity or weight loss. And that's the big delineation, because the majority of health plans do not cover for weight loss or obesity. Most health plans exclude, when I say health plans, I mean self-insured, employer-sponsored health plans exclude medication for treatment of obesity. And those that didn't exclude or don't have seen a huge increase in costs because, if you're covering these things for weight loss with no guardrails, that it's really just turning the faucet on and letting it run. So that is where a smart strategy to do right by your employees really takes a lot of things into account. And you need to factor in your turnover. You need to factor in recruiting and retention. Those types of things are critical when you're looking at, okay, we're already spending money on GLP-1s for diabetes and sleep apnea, and likely more approvals that are coming. Do we want to open it up to help people in their weight loss journey? And if so, what is it going to cost? And what is, the ROI, which is hard to calculate, right? Especially if you've got high turnover, you're probably never going to see that ROI. So those are, I think, things that are often forgotten when you're looking at managing a health plan. And we know that health plan budgets are typically strained anyway. How much do we spend? Where's the benefit? So
question,
I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, thank you. You mentioned guardrails. What guardrails can employers put in place? And I know for a fully insured employer, there's really not much they can do in terms of putting a guardrail in place. And we'll talk about what the move is there and what you can do to break out of that here a little bit later today. But for those that are either level funded and have some flexibility, or self-insured and have some flexibility within their plan design, we've had a couple meetings with some GLP-1 management companies. Is that going to become a necessity in the future, or what other guardrails can employers put in place?
Yeah, it's already complex, and it's becoming more and more complex, right? So what we see when there's a problem in the industry, there's a host of point solutions that come to the table, right? And whether it's a point solution for just overall wellness, or a more broad-based disease management, or targeted at GLP-1s, the question is always, how much do these programs cost? What is their success in engaging patients and holding them to some type of return on investment? Because you're going to see everything from well-established companies that have been in this business for a long time in helping patients kind of adapt and focus their efforts on the GLP-1s, patient compliance, things like that. And then you're going to see fly-by-night companies just coming into the market trying to make a quick buck or a quick $1 million and not really actually impacting either spend or clinical outcomes. So I would say our business has shifted a lot in the last few years in helping employers navigate the various point solutions. Do they have, expertise? Are they well established? What is their niche, and how do they fit in with the current ecosystem? Or does there need to be a change to the ecosystem? So to your point, if they're fully insured, there's not much you can do. If you're self-insured, there are things you can do. But table stakes are having a baseline prior authorization process in place. So making sure that your prescription benefit manager is at least looking and confirming a type 2 diabetes diagnosis before approving one of these GLP-1s. And that's something that surprisingly doesn't always happen, or maybe unsurprisingly, some of the bigger players did not have a prior authorization on these early on. And so you can see what that would do, right? People would go get a prescription, they would go fill it, and they didn't have pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes, but they were able to get the prescription anyway, and use it what we would consider off-label for weight loss until we had these other, same formulations that got approved for weight loss under a different name. So prior authorization is number one, right? And I always take it for granted. I'm like, well, of course you're going to have prior authorization on that, but you'd be amazed how often that's not happening. And then it's really hard to kind of ratchet that back after you've already opened the floodgates, right? So it's like, okay, now we have to do retro reviews on all these people that got approved that shouldn't have, and now we have to tell them they can't take, their Ozempic for weight loss anymore. And obviously that changes their personal budget when those changes happen. So I would say that's sort of number one, is making sure you have a reasonable prior authorization process in place to at least confirm type 2 diabetes if you're not covering for weight loss.
And that kind of leads us into the next question. How do you balance access with financial sanity, right? When you see these companies that are watching their pharmacy spend spike and, kind of go what I would say is out of balance with where we see the traditional norm in pharmacy spend in a plan, when they're getting a little heavy on their pharmacy spend, what's a smart employer doing to balance access of care outside of prior authorizations?
Yeah, I think as you kind of go from, okay, we've got a good solid strategy for diabetes, right? We've got comprehensive prior authorizations. We've got appropriate support for those diabetic patients that, need more healthcare, and they need more support and access to healthcare, whether that be telephonically or, through a direct primary care type solution. So that's one thing in our healthcare system that I think we think is normal, right? It's like, oh, I have to wait 3 months to get into my provider. Well, that impacts care. So how do you remove those barriers on the medical side as well to make sure you're supporting these patients? The other thing to do is, if you are considering opening up access for weight loss and obesity, you have to have a companion program of some sort, and you're able to put in more guardrails when it's coverage for weight loss, where for diabetes, there's only so many guardrails you can put in. You can put in a prior authorization, but if you start making those requirements tighter and harder for them to get their medication, well, that's when pharma says you're making it too difficult. We're unable to provide you a rebate on that medication and a host of other medications. So a lot of people don't realize that the rebate negotiation from pharma is not just about getting on the formulary. It's about making it easy as humanly possible to get that medication. So the negotiation often involves, well, what if you take this standard criteria and weaken it a little bit, or make it a little softer so more people can get the medication? And that's where we see a lot of folks running into trouble, is they say, we've got to get control of our diabetes spend. Okay, we do, but let's do the math and say, if we are going to put additional requirements, let's say we're going to force someone with diabetes to see a dietitian every month in order to get coverage for their GLP-1. Well, now you've added another layer or barrier to access, which may be a completely appropriate barrier, but you're going to lose all of your rebates on your GLP-1s for at least that manufacturer. Well, if we take that math compared to what we're going to potentially save in helping in compliance, it may not add up.
Okay.
So those are some key components. And then when you're going to open it up to, weight loss and helping people in that journey, that's a whole different ball of wax, and making sure that you are putting appropriate guardrails, adding a companion program, ensuring that the medications you're paying for aren't being wasted due to non-adherence or discontinuation. And what the market is showing is people are willing to pay for these medications for the weight loss benefits. So understanding that and building your plan design appropriately, I think, is also a very good thing.
So you hit on a couple things there. Number one, when we're talking guardrails for employers today, when it comes to GLP-1 coverage, you just hit on cost sharing, right? You said people are willing to pay for these drugs. And you also talked about having the prior authorization process or additional support in terms of a companion program, which I think would cover maybe the monitoring piece of this, as well as possibly establishing some clinical guardrails, so to speak, or clinical criteria. I'm curious to know if you can walk me through what a GLP-1 utilization review looks like when you're brought in.
Yeah, when we come in, we're going to look at, number one, we're going to look for medications that are GLP-1s that are not for diabetes, that may be being filled and they shouldn't be. So that's the first thing we look at. So is the PBM approving medications that aren't actually covered under the plan? And surprisingly, we find that is the case. Then number two is going to look at, okay, based on your population, right? So we've got age, demographics, all those things that play into a disease burden within a population. So we're going to look at, is the spend commensurate to the demographics? And then from there, is there anything in place? We're going to be looking at plan design setup. We're going to get the prior authorization criteria from the PBM to say, all right, if the spend is not commensurate, why? And then just keep going down that path of why until we understand what all is happening, because we can't give good advice on where to go if we don't really know where you're at. And what we see often is just, and we've seen this in the specialty drug categories, is just throwing things at the wall to see if they stick because they're so expensive and we've got to do something and it's going to bust our plan. Well, there's high dollar specialty drugs that can and will bust your plan. And they're big hitters, right? But GLP-1s are like death by 1,000 cuts. They're going to creep up on you and they're going to keep creeping until you get to a point where you just flat out can't afford it and you're wondering what happened. So that's another thing, is just monitoring is a good way to say you can't just set a strategy and look at it in 12 months. It's got to be this continual, at least quarterly effort to review what's the data saying, what are the patients saying. Holding your vendors accountable is a full-time job. And so, that's where folks like you come in, folks like us, so that we can say, all right, you're spending this money on this program. Are you getting the value out of it?
I love that answer. And I love your quote there. I wrote that down, death by 1,000 cuts. I can really feel that for some of the clients that we work with, especially on the GLP-1 side. It's totally different than when, you see a client that has maybe 3 or 4 specialty drugs that are starting to eat away. Those can add up really quick, right? But those GLP-1s, like you said, are just going to slowly creep up. The more the market craves this drug, right? The more the market becomes aware of this drug, going from 35 to 40 billion last year to 100 billion by 2030, this is going to be a significant problem for a lot of employers. So I think it's smart that you maybe look at this and say, what guardrails do we currently have in place and what guardrails could we put in place in the future? And to your point, Trevor, I think that's where having those quarterly meetings, so this isn't something that shocks you at renewal, is going to probably be your best strategy forward. Sitting down with an advisor on a quarterly basis, looking through your spend, is going to allow you to identify some of these things and work through these problems before renewal hits, right? So you already have a game plan when you get to renewal and you're not left scrambling. So thank you for sharing on this, Trevor. I'm going to go ahead and move on, and I want to get into the next segment and talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we've been seeing in the news lately, and the legal minefield out there. So there's been a lot going on. We could take this segment in a million and one different directions. I want to start just briefly talking about the latest executive order that we saw from the new administration, talking about PBMs and how they're going to have to match, the pricing that other countries are getting on their drugs. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts on how that might affect the market. I know there's already a countersuit on that, so give us a little insight there.
Yeah, I mean, we've got more activity than we've ever had federally and at the state level. So I can't remember the numbers on state legislation that was passed or introduced in the past, 10 years on pharmacy benefit managers and trying to rein in different things. But it's astronomical. And the problem with state legislation is typically it doesn't apply to anything other than individual market plans or fully insured plans within that state. So what we're seeing now is an expansion into the federal side of things with, you had a bunch of attorney generals basically band together and send a letter to Congress saying, we want you to act on pharmacy benefit managers. We want you to rein in some of these things that we're identifying are problems. We've got, three PBMs that control 80% of the market, right? And so from that standpoint, we've got an oligopoly. And is that really good? Is their market scale and size really benefiting patients and plans, or are they using it to generate record profits? So the biggest things you see in shining a light, right, is underpaying community pharmacies, self-dealing, so basically using prior authorizations to guide patients to pharmacies that the PBM owns. So we've talked a lot at conferences and with our clients about alignment, and there is quite a bit of misalignment when you look at, I use a pharmacy benefit manager. The core role is for them to negotiate with pharmacies and negotiate with pharma for rebates. And if they own a pharmacy, do we just trust them to negotiate with themselves and really ratchet themselves down? It just doesn't make sense.
Right.
But they've been allowed to create these vertically integrated models that have not been shown to really lower and mitigate cost. And then if they're taking a percentage or a portion of the rebates that they're negotiating, are they really looking for the lowest net cost pharmacy or pharmaceutical, or are they looking at the highest rebated drug so they can take their cut? And those are things that are really coming to light. So between President Trump's executive order, you've got the attorney general letters, you've got state legislation. Arkansas had a massive bill that got passed that basically prohibited pharmacy benefit managers operating in the state from owning pharmacies. So if you look at CVS, that's really what that was targeted at. And I think they own 28, 29 pharmacies in the state that now if they want to continue operating as a PBM in that state, they have to close those pharmacies or fire sale them. There's been a countersuit on that already by Express Scripts and CVS Caremark, basically saying this is unconstitutional, you can't do this. And it's going to be a big fight. I mean, because if this stands in Arkansas, it's going to shake up the entire marketplace.
No doubt.
President Trump's executive order is really shining a light on the U.S. paying way higher prices for medicine than the rest of the world. And most people don't know that. Most people don't. Yeah.
Our neighbors to the north, our neighbors to the south, right?
Yeah.
They pay way less than us.
Yes.
And we're just over here kind of lining PBM's pockets. So you hit on something that I want to touch on before we dive into maybe the employer's exposure in a legal battle. But you talked about vertical integration. So, when we look at a health plan at Benesmart, we think of it as a supply chain, right? And the goal of the supply chain is to deliver care and treatment to your employees. And so what Trevor mentioned is vertical integration is when your health insurer owns the pharmacy benefit manager in that supply chain delivering care to your employees. So at that point, you're really stuck. There's not a lot that you can do to impact lowering your spend when your supply chain is vertically integrated. And there's a big misconception out there too, Trevor, that I want to hit on, is that a lot of employers will think that, hey, we've done our due diligence, we've done our part, we're self-funded, we're doing everything that we can. But if you go self-funded in the ASO model and you're working with Meritain or UMR, you're still married to their pharmacy benefit manager, and there's not a whole lot that you can do about it. So you really need to be looking at ways that you can integrate independent and transparent vendors into your supply chain. And this is where you can really, number one, see some of these costs go down. But more importantly, this is where you can protect yourself, because as an employer today, guys, you have a fiduciary duty to design a program that's going to deliver this care to your employees at the best cost available to you. And so when we shift gears here a little bit and move from some of the federal lawsuits that are happening, on the corporate level, we want to talk about how some of these mid-size and larger employers can be exposed to their own lawsuits if they're not doing their due diligence and putting in place a transparent PBM. So we've seen rising lawsuits, and this has been going on for a little while now, right? I think the first one that really broke the ice or was the big news producer was the Johnson & Johnson lawsuit, right? So pharmacy benefits are becoming targets for litigation. So is that something where, it's just the Fortune 500 companies that have to worry about these lawsuits, Trevor, or is this something that we could see at a mid-size employer level?
Well, I think we can learn a lot from the 3 lawsuits that have been filed and know that they're probably not going away. They're going to keep coming. What's amazing is you have a drug manufacturer being sued for breach of its own fiduciary duty on their pharmacy plan, right? So you've got J&J, Wells Fargo, and JP Morgan, and what the basis of the lawsuits are pretty simple. ERISA is the law that governs health plans, and the people in charge of the health plan are expected to do what's prudent and manage the plan. And what is semi-interesting is probably for about 10 years, I've said anyone using the big 3 PBMs is in fiduciary breach, not just because they may not be prudent, but they don't know what they're paying. They know that in number, but they don't know how much the PBM is making to do the job that they're paid to do. So that's where a lot of this buzz around transparency and being able to see behind the curtain comes in. And so you've got these mega employers that you think, well, they're big, they've got massive scale, and they're using these big companies that should be able to negotiate better than anyone else. But in reality, those employers are overpaying because they've either allowed their benefits consultant to just use a consortium that they get paid on, or they've just kind of trusted in the process that is being done. And the lawsuits basically say that's not enough. You need to do more to make sure that your employees are paying the lowest possible amount. And not always, it doesn't have to be the cheapest, but it has to provide the most value. And there's been some pretty egregious examples where, Fortune 500 company is paying, 6,000 times what a cash price could be on a generic specialty medication. And so it's really exposed that massive price hike and spread and where all the money is going when it shouldn't be, right? And so all of this, the federal light and pressure, the lawsuits, I believe is all good because it's shining a light on the misalignment that drives up costs. It's anyone's guess when a lawsuit will actually, come to fruition and get settled. They've all been dismissed as far as I know at this point, but not based on merit. It's really interesting, and we're continuing to watch it because the lawsuits, they do make sense. It's like you breached your fiduciary duty. The crazy part about them is they're not suing just their company; they're suing the individuals in charge of the health plan. So you want to talk about risk? We talk a lot about de-risking someone's pharmacy plan because it's not always about, saving the most amount of money or what have you. A lot of times it's just, let's de-risk. Let's make sure that you've checked all the boxes on your pharmacy plan. So if you end up being the one in a lawsuit, you can say, no, here's our process. Here's what we went through. We knew we might be overpaying here, but we decided to do this because of X, Y, and Z. And that's the big thing, especially, going through a great SIA presentation last week on fiduciary duty, is you can't just execute a 3-year PBM contract and put your head in the sand and not monitor it.
Yeah.
And not manage it, because things are changing too quickly.
Right. And you hit on fiduciary duty. And I just want to be clear with anybody in HR who may be on the call today, or even some CFOs who may have joined us. When Trevor's talking about the person responsible for managing the plan, it's not your broker, guys, right? You can't just think, okay, well, our broker goes to market, we're good. Fiduciary responsibility ultimately is going to come down to who signs the line on the plan sponsor, right? So when you see plan sponsor and your broker asks you to sign it, a lot of times it's HR that ends up signing it. It could be the CFO. That person could be held liable. So he mentioned a simple fix to that is put some processes in place, right? Because if there ever is a lawsuit and you say, here's our process, here's how we vet vendors, here's how we decided on this vendor for these reasons, and you can back up the fact that you actually have a process in place to evaluate these vendors, then you're going to be that much further ahead of this than a lot of other companies. So, a simple process that we like to use is a PBM evaluation checklist. So prior to your renewal, right, prior to deciding who's going to be your vendors, bring in a couple PBMs, let them share with you what they can do to help lower your spend, and then maybe actually share some data with them so you can get a PBM proposal from them and maybe evaluate them based on a simple checklist, right? And some of the things that you're going to want to look for are, how do they come to costs? How are they paid, right? That's going to be one of the most important things that you want to look at. What does the rebate situation look like, and what other programs do they have available? This is all part of at BeneSmart, our mid-year health plan checklist. So we encourage you guys to get out ahead of this. This is something we're going to be giving away free at the end of the call today. So if you're interested in this, our team will reach out to you over LinkedIn, and you can get a copy of this. It's going to be super helpful to help you get out ahead of your renewals. Let's get back to the lawsuits. I'm curious to know, where do most employers drop the ball when it comes to their fiduciary duty on pharmacy plans?
Most employers drop the ball in just taking whatever their broker advisor recommends and doing that. Which I get it. They're running businesses. They're not experts in healthcare or health benefits. Unfortunately, when we talk about alignment of interests, again, there's a lot of misaligned interests when it comes to, recommending certain solutions. And in pharmacy, it's just too complex. So you have to know what you're getting in your pharmacy benefit and how much you're paying your PBM. Now, the beauty is, this information was always historically really hard to find or impossible to get. But the CAA has a provision around drug cost reporting. It's called RxDC. And that actually allows you as a self-insured plan sponsor to get your data and file it with the federal government. That opens up the opportunity for you to see how much money your PBM is making. Now, what we've experienced since this passed, I think we just went through our 4th plan year filing, is the majority of employers just let their PBM file it. And they didn't ask any questions. They just said, yeah, okay, good, they're filing it. I'm too busy. That is not de-risking. That is adding to your risk. Because that's the loophole of the law, is the PBM can file on your behalf. You need to get it, and if they do that, you never see the data. So we've done 2 very large plans with a big 3 PBM, and both exposed spread revenue or margin of about $17 per member per month.
Yeah, and I'm glad you hit on that and brought that up, Trevor, because I'm just laughing at it. It's so silly that, as a requirement of government oversight, they're asking you to get your hands as the employer on your pharmacy costs and report them, but the health plan or the PBM just says, "Oh, don't worry, we got you covered." And most employers are like, "Oh, thank God I don't have to do that." And you're just opening yourself up to more exposure. And for those plans that do that on behalf of the employers, good luck trying to get that data if you even wanted it. I'll give you a quick example. We have a client with about 120 people on their health plan. They're level funded with Cigna, and they requested their pharmacy data, and Cigna sent over an invoice for $300. So you got to pay $300 just to get your own data. And then they sent over not one, but two NDAs, two separate NDAs that you have to sign just to get access to your data. And on top of it, the craziest thing is you're paying $300 just to get a look at how much you're overpaying on your drug spend. So these health plans don't want to share this data with you guys for a reason. And that's where you really expose yourself to some of these legal cases that we're seeing in the market. And so on that, let's talk about some common legal pitfalls in the pharmacy arena. Let's talk about contracts, right? How many employers out there have actually read their PBM contract or would even know where to find it?
I think most can find it within a week. I don't believe most read them. And secondarily, even if they did, this goes back to education, they wouldn't know what they're reading. They're not experts in this space. And most benefits consultants don't know what they're reading. That's why we have our business. And I always say it shouldn't exist. We shouldn't need to exist. Everybody's like, what? Your business shouldn't exist? I'm like, no, it shouldn't. It shouldn't be that complex. There shouldn't be, all these games that are played. But as of today, there are. And so that creates a space for us to come in and identify those and provide solutions to them. So the PBM contract is critical, and having a partner that knows how to negotiate it and understands the language is table stakes. And what you find is even a lot of the benefits advisors, they're not trying to do anything wrong. They're not misaligned themselves, but they don't have the level of expertise and education that is necessary. And then even an attorney, a business attorney does not understand what they're looking at in a PBM contract. They're going to look at limitations of liability, term and termination, things like that. So I think that's a big pitfall. They say, well, our legal team looked at it and they had a couple of changes. I think we're good. Well, I can look, every time I look at it and it's like, oh, our attorney reviewed it. I'm like, well, you can tell your attorney reviewed it because they've taken care of the legalese, but the actual deal, the definitions, the pricing, the 80 pages of, the 2 pages of promises and 78 pages of unwinding them through this language is insane. So you get to a point where that's what drives what happens with your PBM, and you have to be able to hold them accountable, because if you, a lot of the language in those PBM contracts does not even allow you to hold them accountable.
Right.
And that's another risk area as an employer, substantial risk.
Yeah. And, I can speak to that as a benefit advisor and consultant myself. I know my limitations, and I know that when I have a PBM contract, I'm bringing it to you to review because you're the expert in that arena. I can help guide the structure and the building of the supply chain. But when it comes to things like your PBM contract, that's opaque and it's going to be a black box by nature. There's a question on here, Trevor, that says, who teaches you how to read the contract through?
Yeah, the reality is I've been in the business about 15 years and I'm still finding language that I've never seen before. So I can provide a checklist of things to look for. I can help educate folks on here are things that you want to make sure are in your contract. The problem with that is as soon as you ratchet those down, You squeeze the balloon here and it expands over here. So that's why it's really challenging to say, like, who teaches you how to read the contract? Well, if you're in the business, if you're not in this space, it's really hard to learn.
Yeah.
And that's why you hire help, right?
Let's
it's
be clear. Yeah. Employers
we do
don't
the same thing. Like, I'm not a tech expert. I have a resource that is a fractional chief technology officer, because I don't have that expertise. No matter how much I try and learn it, I probably won't. Another good example I thought of the other day, which may be silly, but I was thinking about going to the barber, and how when they like do the hot towel shave and shave my beard and line it up, it's always 10 times better than me trying to do it on my own, right? In the mirror. Like, I can't, no matter how much I practice, I'm not a professional barber. I pay them money to do what they do really well. And so that's, it's a great question. I think my answer would be, you don't actually have to learn how to read the contract. You just need to know when you need help and who to find to help you, and then hold those people accountable to do a good job for you.
Exactly. And so, Cassandra, great question. And I think that kind of leads us to where Trevor was going with the barber analogy. When you have a barber standing over you, they're on the outside looking in, and they can see things that you can't see. And so if you rely too heavily on your broker, they're on the inside already. So it might be wise at that point to do an independent audit, right? And you can do an independent audit with a company like Granite Peaks Analytics. And if you're not connected with Trevor on LinkedIn, encourage you to go do so. If for anything, forget his pharmacy knowledge. Just check out the beautiful posts that he puts up, pictures of Montana. They're awesome. Montana Mondays are one of my favorites. So do an independent audit, Cassandra. I think that would be at least a good start for you to get an idea of what's going on in your PBM contract. And then, we've touched on this a lot, but I just want to wrap up with this on the common legal pitfalls. Transparency is a huge issue right now. And, it's not a buzzword. I know it goes around a lot, kind of like it is a buzzword, but Trevor, what's it mean to have a truly transparent PBM contract?
Yeah, and my good friend Terry Shook actually included something about this in the comments, where it's like rebates, transparency. They're so vague and opaque, and anyone can define them however they wish. And that's what you see in PBM contracts is, and where the industry has shifted. So as employers said, well, I want my rebates. PBMs say, okay, you can have your rebates, but I'm going to define rebates how I want to define them. And I'm going to keep things called manufacturer administrative fees, which for all intents and purposes are rebates. We've just defined them separately so we can keep them. So when it comes to transparency, I really follow this rule. I have my own definition of transparency, and it's who's getting paid, how much are they getting paid, and for what. And that's really the critical element of a transparent PBM contract. In the contract, if I know I'm paying an administrative fee for these services, I know who I'm paying it to, and I can look at how much I've paid my PBM and compare that to the results they've delivered or results they haven't delivered, then I've got a good indication of my fiduciary duty and whether we've done a good job or not. So that's transparency to me. And
Okay.
it gets thrown around. You start hearing, as soon as the middle market comes up with a phrase, net cost focused, low net cost, and employers start gravitating towards it, the big three always come up with it. Well, here's our net cost formulary. The marketing of these terms does not mean it's transparent. Oh, well, we have a pass-through contract. Okay, well, what is pass-through? Why is this fee so much lower than other entities, right? Where are you making money? So that's really, transparency is a buzzword. I also don't think it's the end all be all and can solve everything, but transparency is simply just shining a light where you need to shine it. And I've read contracts where they are transparently taking advantage of you. It says it right there. Like, pharmacy program managers that are keeping all the rebates. And it's like, we're keeping the rebates and it's this much. And it's like, how did you sign that? Well, they're not educated to know that there's anything different or better. That's our goal. That's the whole goal of this webinar, is just to say, ask questions. And if you don't know what to ask and you don't know what to do, hire somebody that does.
Right.
And that's not a shameless plug. It's just that happens for everything. Hold your broker consultant accountable, just like you would an employee. If your healthcare costs keep going up double digits every year, and you've hired your benefits consultant to help you with that, let's figure out why. Why are your costs going up? Are they doing their job? Is it time for a change? Right. And it's so easy to stay the same. But that is disruptive. And people get concerned about disruption. Well, changing my broker is disruptive. Changing PBMs, changing TPAs. Doing nothing is disruptive as well. It's just you got to weigh which one is more disruptive. We see plans that are overpaying by 20, 30%. You think that's disruptive to your people's budget? You think that's disruptive to their 401k? Yeah, I think it is. So, going through a transition and talking about formulary or network transitions that can be disruptive if not done the right way, let's talk about it. Let's evaluate what that looks like to get you to not overpaying. So there's this, fear of doing something different, but staying the same is a decision that can be risky based on a lot of the things we've talked about.
No doubt. So Trevor, we've covered two big risks. Number one, exploding costs. And that was really just focused on the GLP-1 market. But I know that specialty drugs are also exploding for a lot of employers. So I want to talk about next an action plan for how employers can get a handle on all of this. And we also just finished up talking about the legal exposure that you could have. So let's get tactical and let's take a look at what a smart action plan may look like for an employer. So we talked about maybe doing an independent audit, right? Limiting your broker reliance. So for anyone that wants to assess their current state, whether it's reviewing contracts or their claims data and their spending patterns or potential legal exposure, where do you feel is the best place for an employer to start? I would say probably not the contract. I would say probably start with where your spend is. What do you think?
Yeah, the easiest thing to do, regardless of whether the data is, been massaged to show you something that you should see opposed to what maybe you need to make a decision on, is your spend. What are you spending per member per month? And less about what are my discounts, what are my rebates. We see reports sometimes that are like, look at all this savings off of AWP we've provided. I'm like, how is that even in a report? That's not savings. But it's all meant to distract you from the bottom line number, which is what you're spending and what your people are spending per member per month. And to make it easy, I just use a baseline. If you're spending over $100 per member, and by member, I mean covered life, per month, you've probably got something going on in your pharmacy plan that can be reviewed and fixed. Now, if you're spending less, sometimes that's just luck. Other times that's really good management. So that's the first thing. When we talk about alignment, reliance on your broker advisor, and transparency, know what your broker advisor is being paid, if anything, on the pharmacy program. Because if they're making per claim or back-end compensation, it doesn't necessarily bias their advice, but we're all biased by different things, right? Or influenced. So know what you're spending, and know, at least, try and use my definition of transparency. Understand where all your dollars are going. So if I'm at $100 per member per month or more, and I know my broker advisor is making this, my PBM is making this, if I've got a PBM consultant, which is where we fit in, they're making this, is everyone doing their job, and is what they're being paid commensurate with the value and effectiveness of our program? And there's some things that there's not always a solution, right? Like, you could have specialty drugs hitting your plan that is like, yep, that's unfortunate. that person has a very unfortunate condition and this is the only treatment, and that's what insurance is for, right? But there's also opportunities in many cases, where it's like, oh, we can get this for a lower cost, or why are we paying for this one when we can source it this way?
It's like that old saying, one that I love, which is always do your best until you know better, then do better, right?
Yeah.
And you said it earlier, employers don't know what they don't know. So that's why I think it's very important to bring in an outside set of eyes like Trevor, or even another consultant who you feel can give you a good look at where your money's going. Because once you start to follow that money and you understand, especially with your PBM arrangement, who's getting paid, what they're getting paid, and what they're getting paid for, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times there's going to be a lot of different revenue streams to uncover in there, right?
Well, and it's actually eye-opening with you think about prescription benefit manager, just the name of it makes it sound like, okay, they're managing my prescription benefit, they're doing everything they can. Not always the case. PBM consultant, oh, they're paid to make sure I get the best deal. Not always the case. There's back-end deals all the time. There's money flowing here, there, and everywhere. And a lot of PBM consultants in the industry have just globbed onto the complexity of pharmacy and used it to make more money, opposed to doing the right thing. Because doing the right thing's hard. It's hard to manage these things. We do it all day, every day, and it's hard to keep up with, which is why advisors struggle, because they're dealing with stop loss and TPA and payroll and all those things. So that's why I believe firmly that we're all complacent in this. So if you're going to hire someone, know what you're paying them and hold them accountable, whether that's your broker, whether that's a PBM consultant, whether that's, an employee that you've hired to oversee it. Right. And that's what I don't understand sometimes is these companies run multi-million-dollar budgets and they'll hold their employees accountable to a certain level of performance, but not their broker consultant. Right. And it all comes down to transparency and knowing what they're getting paid to do their job they're supposed to do.
I love it. Well, Trevor, we're coming to the end of our time here, and I want to make sure folks know what your next steps would be after this. So, let's say someone's watching this thinking, well, I don't even know where to start. You talked about GLP-1s, you talked about specialty drugs, contracts they can't read, different revenue streams, rebates, right? Let's say if someone's watching this and they're thinking, where do I even start? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you can do is book a call with Rich. I mean, have him just take a high level view of what's going on in your plan and give you some independent guidance. Does he want to work with you as your broker advisor at some point? Probably, but it doesn't hurt to have a second set of eyes. Getting a contract review is critical. So I'd say book a strategy session with Rich. Contract reviews from a non-legal perspective, and just to see like where are the bodies buried, where might you be able to improve. They're fairly inexpensive. Like we usually charge between $1,000 and $3,000 to do a contract review. That's basically a full red line and a summary of what's going on. You're spending more than that it's the cost of a GLP-1. Let's just put it that way.
Right.
And it's good independent advice that can help you de-risk and get a plan for going forward. And then the third piece, right, is understanding the GLP-1 landscape, understanding where those misaligned interests are. Are people getting paid more as my costs go up? Okay, red flag. Let's talk about how to regroup and align those interests.
I love what you said there at the end. Are people getting paid more as my costs go up? And that's the true definition of misalignment, right? When your broker, your consultant makes more money as your premiums go up. We've been in some really creative situations lately where we've had conversations around just completely just cutting our fee out and putting in performance-based fees with employers. So when we hit certain metrics, that's when we get paid. And reason being why we can say that is because we know, after that first strategy session, we can see where the overspend is. right? And it kind of gets me excited to see what may come next for employers, with a lot of focus on this. I really hope that employers will take this advice to heart, go out there, take a deep look at their plan, and figure out how you may be overspending, and think about what you can do with getting some of that money back to your bottom line, guys. So, Trevor, this has been really eye-opening. Appreciate you coming on. For anybody that is going to want the recording of this, we'll be reaching out after the webinar. Also happy to share with you guys a copy of the mid-year health plan checklist. Even if you don't go through the checklist with myself or someone from my team, guys, take this back to your broker. It's going to be a great tool to get you aligned on where your plan needs to be integrated and upgraded prior to the next renewal. So, Trevor, thanks again for coming on today, and everybody that was on the call, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, had a blast, Rich. I could talk about this stuff all day, so thank you.
I could tell. I love it.
Yeah.
Thanks for your knowledge and your wisdom. I learned a lot today, and look forward to catching up soon. All right. Bye, guys.